Welcome to Mansplaining Def Leppard. Here we are today. We've got a Circus magazine with us right here. What we're going to do today, we have Shelley Crow with us.
I love that you're still on the kick with that.
Well, like I said, we did these before where we just brought you in to read these magazines because you don't know a lot about it. And then I sit and explain it. And then everybody's like, I hate watching him mansplain. I'm like, then we're going to do more of it.
We're going to do more for you. Yep, in fact, exactly. You can start with this.
Exactly.
Led Zeppelin, how they got their LPs finished even when disaster struck. What's an LP? What are LPs?
LP. Henrik, do you know what an LP is? Long playing record. So it's basically a record.
Okay.
Just that's what they'd call it, long playing. It goes way back. But anyway, that's all it stands for, your LP. Yep. It's another way of saying vinyl.
Okay.
Same idea. So what we're going to do is we have this Circus magazine, and there's an article in here about Def Leppard that I found. I thought, it'd be fun to read that. Bring Shelley in here to read the article, and then I will throw in the commentary as we go, the mansplaining. And by the way, just so we know, what is it? Who are you and what do you do?
Oh, I'm Shelley Crow. I'm an author and happy to be here learning stuff about music, yes, because my thing is relationships, so this is different.
Yes, Shelley has written three books in a workbook that are all related to relationships.
Different stages, whether you're in heartbreak, getting over one, or you want to be in one, or you want better communication. And we are now doing a show together about communicating.
So sometime in the near future, we're going to be launching another show where Shelley's going to be kind of hosting it, going through a lot of the different things that are in your books, and then talking about things related to relationships. So as we start putting that out, you may be interested in checking some of those things out. It's a little bit different topic than old classic rock, but it's still interesting stuff. So we think you'll enjoy that. So anyway, thank you for coming here and being this. We always love having you be involved. You bring great energy to these experiences, so it makes this much more fun. So Circus Magazine, how many of you had this one?
Yeah, from April 30th, 1983.
1983, April 30th. And so we've done another one where we talked about Van Halen.
We just talked about Van Halen.
Yeah, so this is a different one. This is the year before. This is before 1984 came out. And they were still on the Diver Down album at this point.
They were still in the Diver Down, so people weren't sure about them.
They were not sure what was going to happen, but they were still, everybody knew they were big news. Journey was huge at this point. They were huge. They had, they were, because Escape had come out, I think Escape came out in 81, and then they had the big tour in 82, and then I think it was 83 when Frontiers came out, and they were just huge. Steve Perry was everywhere. Just giant. They were giant at this point. Then there's talking about Van Halen. Judas Priest was a pretty big deal at this point. Def Leppard was huge. They had put out Pyromania, which most people know, the song like Photograph. And anyway, there was a bunch of amazing songs, like Foolin' was on there. And I mean, there was great tunes on that album. Then Rush was kind of always a big deal. Kinks, Keith Richards from the Stones, ABC, Men at Work. Anyway. Then there's Steve Perry, there's Rob Halford. All right, so that's the context of what we're dealing with and what was going on in the music world at the time. So now we're going to jump into Def Leppard, I saw them back around this time opening up for Billy Squier, of all people. And they were, I've been a huge, that's got to be it right there. I've been a huge Def Leppard fan from way back when. They were just amazing. And so, anyway, let's dive into this and see what they have to say about Def Leppard.
Is Def Leppard the next Led Zeppelin? Following the voluntary semi-retirement of The Who and the demise of Led Zeppelin, the escalator to the upper strata of European hard rock hierarchy has been crammed with hopeful contenders.
Now, this is an interesting thing, just by the way. When you look at the setting at this point, it really was when Led Zeppelin disappeared, it left this gaping hole because they were so big. And then of course, the Who was kind of weird time for them, but really there was this who's going to replace them, and there really was this that's why they have an article called this, because there was this mindset of Led Zeppelin's really gone. Here we are a couple years later, and it's still the gaping hole that they've left open in there. And then, there's all these other bands that are kind of like, who's the next big thing? And a lot of people thought it was going to be Def Leppard. And part, there were all these weird little connections, not the least of which was the band name. Led Zeppelin, Def Leppard, spelled kind of weird.
Yeah.
And then you had this, people seeing these parallels and thinking maybe there's something there. Anyway.
Okay. But while frontrunners like AC/DC, Scorpions, and Ozzy Osbourne have risen to the prominence these past 2 years, the suspicion arises that the success they now enjoy may already be peaking, if only because of creeping road weariness or the looming specter of premature burnout.
And you have to put into context here, AC/DC has been around for a long, long time at this point. Scorpions have been around for a long, long time. Ozzy has been around for a long, long time. Def Leppard, of all the bands that they're talking about there,
they're still new.
They're young.
Yeah.
They're kids.
Yeah.
I mean, I think at this point, I don't know for sure, but Rick Allen, the drummer, I think he was still a teenager.
Oh, wow.
So you're talking about the two completely different generations here.
Okay. Yet some of their would-be successors just don't deliver the goods. You can have all the promotion in the world, scoffs Def Leppard singer Joe Elliott. If your songs are no good, the general public will notice it in the end. As their spring concert trek across America gets underway and their third Mercury album, Pyromania, blazes up the charts, Def Leppard seems to be a better long-term bet to pick up Led Zeppelin's mantle.
And again, part of what makes these so fascinating is now looking back.
Yeah.
At what really happened with them. Because in some ways, they were in the long term, they're wrong about that. But you look at what they did, because at this point they'd put out this album Pyromania, which was a huge hit. You know the song Photograph?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. You know the song Unter Gleben, Glauten, Globen. You know the one that starts out with that? You've heard that before, right?
I've heard that one, yeah.
You have heard that?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. All that stuff came off of this album Pyromania. And so then they were huge. That album sold like crazy, and then they disappeared for a few years, and then they put out Hysteria.
Okay.
During that period is when Rick Allen had his arm cut off. I'm sure you've heard about that
Yeah.
before. And then when Hysteria comes out, it becomes one of the biggest selling albums of the 80s. So they became a juggernaut of a band at that point. I saw them on that tour, and they played in the round, and it was huge
I want to
everywhere.
use that word somewhere. Juggernaut.
Juggernaut. It's a great word. Anyway, so they were setting themselves up to become one of the most important bands, if not the most important band of the 80s. Because when you look at especially that next album they put out, which really, the challenging thing when people talk about this stuff is that when Def Leppard put out Hysteria, where they had been known as kind of a hard rock, heavy metal band, that was gone when you put out Hysteria. That was more like pop music. So that's where a lot of, you have conversations with people that watch this channel, and you're like, yeah, but it's not really. Anyway.
It's not really them.
They'd changed a lot in that period of time.
Def Leppard seemed to be a better long-term bet than to pick up Led Zeppelin's mantle. And these days, they don't have to fall back on promotional hocus pocus or overblown hype to add to their fuel to the fire. Barely in their early 20s, they've got time to burn, room to grow, and a rabid following that's taking on massive proportions. More than anything else, it's a belief in their own potential, coupled with a close
close identification.
Or identifications with their audience that sustained Def Leppard since they first joined forces in Sheffield, England.
And it's interesting when it says close identification with their audience, because part of that was something I was saying earlier, that these guys really were kids. I think when they got their first record contract, Rick Allen, who was the drummer that we talked about that lost his arm, I think he was 16 when they put their first album out.
I was going back and listening to the lyrics, though. Like, it blew my mind to find out that these guys were still under 20, because when I listen to the music, I'm like, the words and stuff, I'm like, whoa, this speaks to not only like somebody who's a teen, but even me as an adult. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm feeling that. They
did have, when you go back, especially to the album High and Dry, which was their second album, which to me is the best thing they ever did, the raw animal energy that is all over that album. It's some of the best songwriting of that entire decade, in my opinion, And even the next album too. The songwriting was so spectacular. And the lyrics were surprisingly interesting.
Yeah.
They were very rowdy. You know, they were very teenage boy kind of feeling, a lot of them, but they weren't, how do I put this? There's so many bands that the music had this air of rebellion, but it just seemed silly and it fell flat. Def Leppard didn't feel that way to me.
Feel that way, no.
It was, they had this raw kind of, I don't know what to say about it, but it
felt
was
real though.
Yeah.
You know, like you knew that was a real experience, and it didn't seem like just this like little team.
It was this raw energy that they were bringing to the music. I loved this time period with Def Leppard. It was just awesome. So, by the way, if any of you saw them during these tours, before we go any further, drop down in the notes and make a comment about seeing them on these tours and what you thought about that energy at that time.
Okay, we formed the band at the beginning of 1978, a bunch of kids who were barely old enough to drink, the 22-year-old Elliott recalls, citing group influences ranging from Zeppelin to Queen to Mott and the Hoople.
Mott the Hoople, yeah.
We rehearsed and wrote songs for 6 or 7 months before even attempting to play live because we wanted to get out and play a full set of our own material. That's pretty cool. That's a long time to practice before. You know what it's like in America where you go to a bar and they have a band that does all Journey and Bad Company songs.
Hey, we want to hear from you. And what I mean by that is we really, really want to hear from you. Down in the first comment below and in the show notes, there is a link where you can literally go sign up for 15 minutes to actually give me a call. And what I want to hear from you is, number one, I want to hear the 3 videos that we have made that you liked the most. Number 2, I want to hear the topics that you want us to do or that you enjoy the most. We'll have a quick meeting, go through those, and then anything else you want to chat about. We got 15 minutes. There's a link down below. So sign up for one of those slots, and we're looking forward to talking to you.
In England, there are also a few places like that. We wanted to shock people. We went on stage and didn't do any songs that anybody had ever heard before, and for some reason, it worked.
Okay, now this is such an important thing. There are very few bands that could ever do that.
Oh yeah, I was just thinking most people start out covering.
Because the reality of it is most people's music is just not good enough, and their performance is just not good enough to not do that. And I will put myself in that group because I was a professional musician for a long time, and I wrote tons of music, and we recorded CDs, and we had tons of music out. But if I'm to be honest about it, it was not good enough.
Yeah.
And so I made most of my money as a professional musician. Yeah, it's probably true. Playing cover tunes, doing what he just said there. We'd go to these nightclubs and you just play what people are familiar with.
Right.
So it's just not, it's very, very difficult unless you've got something really unique and special to show up somewhere and play your own music and have anybody care at all. Because it's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. And I'm sure many people watching this right now have had that experience. And it is a little bit painful. I got over it a long time ago, but there was this moment where I had to look in the mirror and go, maybe I just wasn't that good. You know? Where I just had to come to grips with the fact that I was a songwriter and I thought my stuff was great, but maybe it just wasn't that great. Yeah. So.
Not yet out of his teens, Elliott had fulfilled his most vivid schoolboy daydream, that of an imaginary group playing imaginary gigs, which he'd invented years before and called, prophetically enough, Def Leppard. By sending rough tapes to the British music papers early on, the real Def Leppard, Elliott, drummer Rick Allen, bassist Rick Savage, and guitarists Pete Willis and Steve Clark, caught the ears of key critics, upping the number of gig offers in the process.
And by the way, just as a note, this is important. Pete Willis was only in those first 2 albums.
Okay.
He then was replaced by a guy named Phil Collen, not Phil Collins.
Okay, I was
Phil
wondering.
Collen.
I was like, Phil Collen. Wait a second.
Yeah.
Does this work out?
See, he's the one that ended up playing the guitar on the Anyway, he was the guitarist. You'll see his picture on the back of Pyromania. And then he was with them after that. So anyway, but the original band there, that's what they're talking about. Pete Willis, it was you really only had him in those first 2 albums.
But in a paranoid economic climate, the record industry didn't go for the bait. Borrowing $1,000, the band financed a self-produced and independent distributed EP, Get Your Rocks Off, which impressed several influential disc jockeys.
Do you know what a disc jockey is? Do you know that term?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Yeah. Garnered airplay on the BBC and sold over 24,000 copies in England as a result.
Yeah, this is pretty interesting because there are a few bands that somehow, it's pretty rare, but there's a few bands that have managed to pull that off where they self-funded something. And it's the thing that really made it happen for them. You've got Def Leppard is one of them. There's another band called Queensryche, who we've talked about before, where they self-financed an EP. They ended up selling something like 50,000 copies of it.
Oh, wow.
That got them interested. Rat had something like that, where they put out this EP, and it sold really well, got them a record contract. And another one was Motley Crue. But theirs wasn't an EP. They recorded a full album called Too Fast for Love, and it just exploded.
Huh.
And then all these, but see, back then, a lot of times, you're talking about a different world. And there were bands that were like, we have to scrape together a bunch of money and put out a record. And then they would go at their concerts and they'd sell their record or sell their cassette tape. This is before CDs.
Yeah, before. And now we talk about like self-published, and that's something we all do at home now. We're like, oh, we have access to so much more. But back then, this is a big thing.
And this is the part that we sometimes forget about, because if you went to play a gig and you were selling your records, the only people that knew you were selling a record were the 50 people in that bar.
Yeah.
It's not like you could put it online and everyone on the planet knew it. No, it's these people. And you're up on the stage going, hey, our record back in the back, buy t-shirts and whatever. But that was it. You had these, so you had to play a lot and you had to push these records. You had to be out there like really, really pounding the pavement to make this work for you. Where today you can literally put out a song, and if you do it right, everybody on the planet hears it the next afternoon. I mean, so to speak. But it's a totally different world today. Okay.
When the subsequent storm of big label interest finally died down, Def Leppard had signed a pact with PolyGram, but the young band soon encountered its first obstacle: its own naivete. Leppard's original management, for example, consisted of 2 guys who ran a record shop. They said they could help us, which they did, Elliott explains. They got us support, slots for Sammy Hagar and AC/DC in England, and signed us to the record deal with PolyGram. Once they'd completed the AC/DC tour, however, it was evident that a more experienced hand was needed. Peter Mensch was then managing AC/DC, Elliott says. He approached us and said, hey, listen, enter Leppard's new management. Mensch in the UK, Cliff Bernstein in the USA, in time to see the first album, On Through the Night, shoot to a promising 51 in Billboard, boosting by the band's first stateside foray, supporting Ted Nugent, Pat Travers, and AC/DC.
So they put out this album, On Through the Night, which was really their first, major label release. And then, they go on these big tours, and then that's when they really, really started making a name for themselves. And again, when you look at this, like Ted Nugent and AC/DC and Pat Travers, these guys had been around for a long time by the time you're at this period. Mm-hmm. And so Def Leppard, these were just kids. And to find themselves in this position, anyway, it's pretty, because AC/DC, this is Back in Black time period. Which is their biggest selling album.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's just fascinating looking at how these young guys made this happen.
By the time of the second album in 1981's High and Dry, the band had a solid following in the UK, where the LP went to top 20, and Leppard seemed on their way to be doing the same in America. While inflated egos often go hand in hand with growing fame, Elliott is proud that the band stayed cool. Coming from Sheffield, he explains, we're totally a working class. It keeps you down to earth. But the early British punk bands also swore allegiance to their working class origins, yet reviled this very brand of flashy, heavyweight rock in the Leppard called their own. The kids who were in the punk were below working class, Elliott said, disdainfully. They were in the sewers. They had no respect for themselves. Safety pins through their nose, shit like that. Unlike the punks, who were often content to live in the dole, Leppard's members found a working solidarity by taking on such employment as they could get.
So, it is interesting because when you're talking about this 1981 period, punk rock had really hit many years earlier. So the Sex Pistols were 5-6 years before this. And yet that whole thing, that energy had been around, and they were kind of like almost, as they talk about it here, they were like parallel tracks in some way. You know, they both had this gritty, heavy music, but the attitude was a little different. And it's funny how all of these things, what's so funny about all this stuff is that all this stuff comes from the working class and the grit and and then it eventually becomes mainstream. All of it, even punk rock, where we kind of see it that way over time. And it's just, so when they say losing their working class roots, eventually all this stuff, eventually they're all wealthy and they're all famous. And
yeah, but he calls the punk below working class.
I know, it's just funny, but when you look at, who's more legendary than the Sex Pistols? Look at that. Really, these people are, they're super wealthy and super successful, and I can't speak to their personalities and whether they've lost their working class roots. The point is, eventually all this stuff moves out of that world of we're just oppressed working class people, and now I have a mansion in Hollywood. For those of us that love this classic media, I think most of us remember these things, audio and videotapes. And I recently realized that a lot of the viewers of this channel don't realize that behind this channel, there's a company called the Audiomover Digitizing Studio. And for 25 years, we've been digitizing old media like this for individuals and organizations across the United States and Canada. So if you have any old audio or videotapes you need preserved, we can help. And for anybody watching this video today, we're offering a 15% discount on any Audiomover digitizing service. Just use the discount code on the screen. So visit audiomover.com today to learn more and get an order started.
Unlike the punks, who were often content to live in the dole, Leppard's members found a working solidarity by taking on such employment as they could get. I was a van driver. Steve was a lathe engineer. Savage worked for the British Rail, and Rick Allen was still in school. We'd see bands at Sheffield City Hall, UFO, Judas Priest, and people like that. We were the same kind of kids as the ones who would come to see us now. The past year has seen some change in Leppard's lineup. Weeks into the session for Pyromania, Pete Willis was cut loose, apparently due to personal problems. His replacement,
by the way,
Phil Collen.
Personal problems, from what for all intents and purposes, as I understand, it was just alcoholism.
Oh, okay. That's what I thought.
Had a real serious problem.
His replacement, Phil Collen, comes from another British band called Girl. With Collen aboard to finish Pyromania, the band has come up with an LP that could propel it into the top 20. I would expect it to go that far, Elliott says confidently. The music on Pyromania doesn't move at 1,000 miles an hour, but it's still heavy rock played with a lot of power, which is what I find a lot of American bands don't have. Bands like Journey are very melodic, but they don't use their guitars much. They definitely play for the radio.
Which is so funny hearing this, because by the time they put out their next album, that's what they were doing.
Def Leppard appeared to have a very one side of their, or have everyone on their side. The fans, the British rock press, their management, and their record label. We've really got this feeling that they're going to be gigantic, says PolyGram publicist Sherry Ring, adding that the company offered to fly American critics to Europe to catch Leppard in the act. Industry cutbacks being what they are, this shows a rare degree of faith, though Joe Elliott takes a cautious view of the media buildup.
Yeah, I don't know how, when you hear Pyromania, how you could not think they were going to be one of the biggest things in the world. They were. It was so good. To this day, I'd love to hear what you guys think about this, but I maintain that High and Dry is a better album, but Pyromania is just one of the greatest things to come out of the 80s as far as hard rock goes. It's so good. So how a record company wouldn't have known that they were just going to be huge. And it's funny when I tell people that I saw them on this tour opening up for, have you ever heard of Billy Squier?
No.
Yeah, exactly. Def Leppard was opening up for who? You see what I mean? That's how big Def Leppard, looking back at it now, it almost seems comical.
Yeah.
Because Billy Squier kind of disappeared and Def Leppard remains legends. And you think that's really funny. They were opening up for him at that point, but they were at this point, the precipice where they were about to become one of the biggest things in the world. And they stayed that way for years. You know, they kind of moved into legend status because during that off time, you know, Rick Allen loses his arm. And so they're kind of always, you're kind of hearing about them. And then there's this thing, some new album's going to come out. And then eventually Hysteria comes out and it sells like 25 million copies. It was crazy. So successful.
When our first album came out, we did get a hell of a lot of piss in England about selling out to America, he says, with a little regret. They thought we'd produce the first album to sell to FM radio, which we didn't. Elliott stresses that the band wants to break in a huge way and concede that Leppard still has a way to go in achieving that goal. We think of ourselves as a universal band that wants to be big all over the world.
Now, can I make a comment here? I have to say something. And I want to get your feedback, everybody watching this right now, because when it says think of ourselves as a universal band that wants to be big all over the world. Okay. One of the most universal bands that has ever existed is a band called AC/DC. You know who AC/DC is.
Yeah.
Henrik, you've heard AC/DC. Everybody knows AC/DC. There's rarely been a band that was more kind of like a people's, just everybody gets it, rock and roll.
Okay.
You Shook Me All Night Long, Highway to Hell, Back in Black, just all this stuff is the kind of stuff an entire stadium. It's still, obviously, because they still play stadiums doing this music. They are the people's band. Now, I have to say this because Def Leppard, the album High and Dry, which was right before Pyromania, sounded a lot like AC/DC. It had all the AC/DC elements in it. And they kind of were, in a way, setting themselves up to be this very, very universally applicable band where everybody just kind of gets it. And they almost did it. Hysteria, I think, derailed them, where they kind of lost the direction they were going, and they went off into this pop thing that made them billionaires in the process, but they lost that footing that AC/DC managed to keep all these years later.
Well, I didn't know that there was this kind of rift between like England and America when it came to the music at the time.
Yeah, apparently. Well, yeah, but okay, there was a rift, but there was also, it's a funny thing because for a lot of bands, that really was the goal. Okay, we got a following over here in England, but where do we want to be famous? Over there. Because that's where the people are. It's a much bigger place. We can tour for months. We can play for many, many, many more people. Where England is a fraction of the size of the United States, and you can play for months over there. And if you can be famous in the United States, that's what you want to do. And I think there was this kind of mentality about it in England, like, hey, what about us? Yeah, exactly. Where you just start realizing, no, really, the people on the other side of the pond, they're the big dog. That's where you make your money. That's where if you want to get famous, your goal ultimately is to make it in America. So that was so it really did have that kind of thing where people would look down on them a little bit, and it's like, yeah, but you would want to do it too.
Yeah, if you were in my shoes, you would still.
That's where you'd be trying to go.
Yeah.
Well, think about it. Go all the way back to the Beatles. You know, when they came to America,
oh,
it was the biggest thing. Everybody, and that was the thing. How do we break into America? And if you can do that, yeah. Anyway.
Interesting. We think ourselves as a universal band that wants to be big all over the world, he says. Not just in a little territory. With High and Dry, we managed to get the number of 38 in the Billboard, which is good. But we're no Journey. Perhaps Pyromania will be the album to change all of that.
Yeah, which it was. It did change everything for them when Pyromania kind of came in and it took off. It was huge. It was super, super famous. And then, like I said, for those of us that were really into Def Leppard, that next album, even though it was monstrous, huge, for a lot of us, it was a letdown. Even though it was arguably it was the most successful thing they ever did by a long shot. For those of us that loved that, what I was saying earlier, kind of that pure guttural rock and roll sound that seemed like it was more AC/DC and Universal, they detoured away from it.
So looking back in time, the article starts out about them like, are they going to be the one to replace Led Zeppelin?
Yeah.
And do you feel like they...
No, not even close. No, and nobody really ever... It's funny, I could get myself in trouble if I start philosophizing about this, but it's really interesting when you look back at the decades. There were certain bands that really... brought something new to a decade and became the super mega stars. And I don't know that there was you had the Beatles and the Stones in the 60s. Led Zeppelin kind of owned the 70s. And then I would get so much trouble saying what I'm about to say.
Oh no.
But the band that really revolutionized the 80s, in my opinion, it was not a heavy metal hard rock band. It was U2.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
They were the ones that came in and they opened, like Led Zeppelin owned the 70s. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, U2 defined everything about the 1980s.
Yeah.
And the reason I bring them up, and people are hating me for this right now, but there's so few bands that became the super groups, the ones that just kind of, where they became timeless in a way. And the Beatles were that in the 60s, Led Zeppelin was that in the 70s, and you look at the 80s, who did that? There's no doubt you had hundreds of super famous, massively successful things, but U2 was the band that became the stadium thing that created their own sound, their own direction, redefined things. They set their own path, like Led Zeppelin had done, like the Beatles had done. Mm-hmm. And they, to me, were the ones that kind of did that when the 80s hit.
Sense. I would have never thought of that, but that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, again, one of the great things about this channel is that all these things don't matter, but they're fun to argue about.
You can disagree.
So if you disagree with that, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. That's what makes this, because this is like what me and Gary and friends, we would just sit up at night and just talk about this crap, and you guys know it. And so then it's like, and then you'd get in arguments about it, and it was kind of,
you and Gary
it was very fun. Yeah.
I can't see you and Gary really arguing.
Well, I don't know if we've argued, but you'd have these kind of things. This is what so many friendships were built on, was sitting around, late at night in your dorm room at somebody's house, flipping through records, talking about music, and then, dude, you know what? And then you're philosophizing about stuff, and it was very fun. And this is what we do now in the studio. So there you go. That was very fun. I love talking about Def Leppard. They're a super fun band. They had some great music. And now, with all these years later, looking back at what people were saying at the time, especially this whole idea where there were a lot of people, like that title of the article said, there were a lot of people thinking, who is going to fill that gaping hole of Led Zeppelin? It was just one of those things people talked about.
Yeah.
And some people thought it's probably going to be Def Leppard.
And it was you too.
Yeah, but that's what I think. So anyway, all right. Hey, thanks for taking time to watch this video. Shelly, thank you for being here again.
Thanks for having me.
Look up her books at shellycrow.com, SHELLECROW.com.
That's it.
You can find her books there. And leave your comments, follow the channel, like the video, and with that, have yourself a fantastic